Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to another video. Today we're testing out if my Simon Hurley Create stamping foam works along with stencils, because they're a lot thinner than other designs that I've pressed them into before. And we're also stamping using some new Gina Designs fall stamp sets. They're adorable and we're really embracing the fall theme in our room as we craft. Alright, for the first card we're using the original size stamping foam, and this comes in a pack of 4, and it's a great size that's going to leave a nice border around the edge of your card. Now the stamping foam is quite dense, so you could use it as is and kind of press in and use this by itself. But if you've seen my videos before, you know that to get the most crisp results, I do recommend attaching this onto an acrylic block. So I'm going to add some Nint tape on the back here. You want some sort of low tack tape, and then I'm going to grab an acrylic block. These are my Simon Hurley Create acrylic blocks. They come in a pack of 2 and they're a great thickness, but they also work really nicely with this size of stamping foam. So I'll press that down, and once it's attached, you then have a nice solid handle, which is going to give a much more even pressure since it's super solid. Now for this first design, I'm going to use the Ghosted Stencil. I love this one. All of these adorable ghosts on here are just such a great design for fall and Halloween. So I'm going to set this down on my table. I recommend setting it down on a hard surface like this, and I'm going to stamp into it. I've actually seen some people take the stencil and kind of press like this on top, but for me, I've found it to be easiest to stamp into the stencil. Then I can go in and heat up the stamping foam. I recommend to heat it for about 10 to 15 seconds. Make sure to keep your heat tool moving. And I'm using the Ranger heat tool here because it gives a less focused heat, which means it's going to disperse the heat a little bit more for a really nice even heating of the stamping foam. But you can use any heat tool. Once I'm done, I'll really quickly stamp this right into the stencil. I kind of rock it a little bit as I'm pressing so that it gets all of the edges really nicely impressed. And there we have our texture. So it's a little bit different because instead of being like a stamp where it impresses into the foam, it actually is going to give you a raised surface wherever the holes in the designs were. So you'll see it kind of gives a unique result. I'm going for a really Halloween color theme here, but if I took out this red ink pad, these two colors would make mud since they're opposites on the color wheel. So instead I'm placing this in here because these are really close on the color wheel. They're actually one step apart. So that's how you know they're gonna blend really nicely together. I usually reference the color wheel whenever I'm coming up with color blends like this so that I get the best results. Starting off with the lightest color, which is Guppy, I'm gonna go into here, and if you guys have seen me use my stamping foam before, you know that instead of tapping like this, because I find you don't get great results and you kind of get marks on there, I'm going to go in and rub on the surface to get a nice even color. Then I'm going in with a little bit of Roar, which is a darker orange color. I'll use kind of the edge of the ink pad and go in and again do that swiping motion. And you'll see it inks up totally different than a stamping foam impression that you might have done with a stamp, because that will kind of leave some white space, whereas the stencil wasn't super thick or a deep impression. So you're not getting much color variation, but we'll see when we stamp it down. All right, then I'll add in a little bit of Crown Me at the end. I love this purple. It's super deep and beautiful. All right, then to get rid of any harsh lines, I'm just gonna go in with a blending brush, and I'm going to go in between some of these lines just to make sure they blend together a little bit easier. To help this ink transfer really vibrantly, I add some water on my surface, so I go from a little bit of a distance, and I'm just going to lightly mist this down. Really quick spurts of water. That way you don't get any globs on there, but you get a nice mist which will help it transfer. Then I'll line this up, stamp it down, and give some good pressure to make sure that it transfers. Then when I lift this off, check out the results you get. So you actually get most of it to stamp. It stamps in a solid color here, but the cool part is that since it was raised just a little bit, you actually get these kind of white halo edges around it. I think it's super cool, and it definitely gives a different look than anything I've created with the stamping foam before. All right, now to clean this off, I'm going in and spraying it down with water, and if you've used your Simon Hurley Create inks before, you know that they clean off really nicely without staining your stamping foam, which is one feature that I really like. But if you're using an ink that usually stains, you might want to use some stamp cleaner. You can keep the impression in here if you want to keep the stamp, but if you want to use it for something different and reuse the stamping foam for another image, I'm going to reheat this just the same way that I heated it up in the first place, and it's going to slowly return back to being the flat stamping foam, and then you can go in and continue stamping with any texture around your house. So check that out. I love that it's reusable and you can use it on a bunch of different projects. I want to keep this card pretty simple, but I'm going to start off by just cutting this out. To do this, I'm going to line up the edge of the stamping straight along with this guide. Then I'll trim it down. And I'll do this all the way around. This is gonna give me a nice even border because we lined it up with the same guide. So even if your stamping was crooked on the edge, because we're lining it up like this, you're gonna get a straight cut, and so it'll even things out. And to finish off this card, I'm gonna use the Haunted House stamp set. I love this one because it's got lots of solid images, so if you're not a big fan of coloring, this can be a really fun set for you. And of course, if you love Halloween, this is gonna be the one for you. I wanna know in the comments down below, do you like to make fall cards or Halloween cards more? I'd love to hear from you guys. Personally, I think I like fall and Thanksgiving cards a little bit more, and the color scheme that kind of goes along with that is so fun. But that doesn't mean I can't make a fun Halloween card here. I'm gonna place this down in my Misty stamping tool because this is a super solid image, and I don't want to mess it up. So I'm gonna peel this right off of the acetate, and then I kind of want it at the bottom of the background here. Lift it up. And sometimes when you just cling a stamp like that, there's gonna be some air bubbles in it, so I like to just go in to make sure I'm gonna get the best image, lift it up, and then push out those air bubbles. All right, then I'm bringing in a little bit of VersaFine Clear. Again, this ink is gonna be really great for stamping this solid and really nice and black. I'll give it some good pressure. And then this is why the Misty is super helpful because I'm gonna re-ink this stamp, and I wanna get it a little bit more solid than we have it here. So I can go back in, give some good pressure to stamp it all down. And there we go, much crisper. So 2 stampings of that, and there we have it. And I love the little details, the little eyes in there. There's a little spider in that window. This is so adorable. And then if I don't add clear embossing powder over top of this, it's gonna get all over my fingers. So I'm gonna throw over a layer and then heat set this until it's nice and shiny. And I also find that the clear embossing powder kind of intensifies this color, so it'll really make the Haunted House stand out even more. Then again, keeping it super simple, I'm gonna use the sentiment that says Happy Halloween. And you know, cause this house is a little bit wonky at the top there, I think it might be fun to kind of fit this right in there and stamp it a little bit crooked to follow this design. I'm pretty OCD, so I don't usually do this, but I think it's gonna be fun. Again, I'll ink it up in black and we'll stamp it right down. All right, now let's assemble this. I'm gonna use this purple cardstock. It's really nice, a dark purple color, and I think it's going to really go along with our card. So I'll add some tape runner down, and then I'm using a side folding card base. So I just line it up with the fold, and then place this down, and it should line up with the rest of the card. I want to pop our panel up, and this will also help it cut down on warping a little bit since we did a lot of heat embossing to it. So I'm going to go in with some foam tape, and yeah, that adds lots of dimension, and then it totally helps kind of adhere it down without the warping. And that finishes off this card. I love using the ghosted stencil to create that really fun Halloween themed background, and that haunted house on top is just totally adorable. That really nice bold image contrasts it nicely and makes for some easy and quick cards. For the next card, I'm going to use the circle cut stamping foam. I love this because it has the circle that's solid and then the outside frame as well. So you could stamp the background without the circle, or you could stamp the circle by itself. And this comes with 2 of each of these in a pack. Now we also have a large acrylic block that fits this size of stamping foam. So again, I'm going to bring in my mint tape and tape the 4 corners so that we can stick this down to our acrylic block. This is especially helpful because when the stamping foam gets this big, it can sometimes be hard to get pressure all over. So by having the acrylic block, which is nice and solid, it's going to ensure that you can get really nice pressure all the way around. Now I'm gonna bring in the Nothing But Net stencil for this. I love the texture of the stencil. I think it's kind of super cool and abstract, and these thinner lines are gonna be a lot different than what we've got with the ghosted stencil. I'll go in here with my heat tool for about 15 to 20 seconds, again making sure to keep the heat tool moving so we get evenly dispersed across the surface. Now once that's good and hot, I'm going to really quickly press this into the stencil and kind of rock it back and forth again to get that even pressure. And then when we lift this off, check out the texture that we got. Now for this, I'm gonna bring in some fall colors, so some yellows, oranges, and red tones. Starting off with a little bit of Shooting Star, I'm gonna go around and ink it up in about 3 areas. And then I'll also bring in a darker tone of that same sort of color, so a little bit more of a darker mustard yellow, and I'll bring it more around the edges just to add some shading and depth. Same thing with a little bit of orange. We'll add this in some select areas around the stamping foam. And then again, I'm bringing in a darker version, so this time I'm using a little bit of Roar and just touching around the same areas that have the orange around the edge. Then I'm gonna bring in a little bit of Psych, which is this nice kind of yellowy green color. And I don't really care if these colors make mud or not, so I'm not worrying too much about it because the brown is just going to bring on even a little bit more fall vibes. And then again, bringing some green in the corner areas of where we added down that lighter green. And then last but not least, I'll finish it off with a little bit of red. So going in with some bee sting, and then game over in those same areas to finish off the edges. Now this is looking a little bit rough, so I'm going in here and blending out these harsh marks again, just using the blending tools with the same tones and ensuring that these are all nicely blended together, and it'll give us a much better stamped result. All right, now I'm going to mist this down. We want light mists on there so there's not too much. All right, then I'll line it up with the bottom and it should line up all the way up, and then I'll press really lightly. Now I'm pressing light because in those impressed areas, if there's still ink, I don't actually want it to transfer. And then when I lift it off, you guys can see that you get this really beautiful stamped design. And in the area where there's those lines, you get a little bit of light ink, but because we didn't press super hard, you're not gonna get it all to transfer and you're gonna get a cleaner design. To add a little bit more depth and bring on even more of the fall vibe, I'm gonna go in using a little bit of Gur ink, which is my brown neutral, and I'm gonna go on the edge and just blend it right on. You don't need to add too much, but I find that just touching the edge will give it a little bit of depth. It's gonna darken the edge to draw your eye to the lighter center. And also it just kind of dims some of these super bright colors, making them a little bit more fall-like. All right, to finish off this card, I'm gonna use this Autumn Scarecrow stamp set. And I love this little Scarecrow for the card that we're creating. I think he'll be adorable in the center of that circle. I'll add it right down onto my acrylic block. And then I can stamp it down onto some stark white cardstock. I'm gonna use a little bit of VersaFine Clear Nocturne ink to stamp this down. It's really nice jet black, and then also it's a pigment ink, so it's gonna stay wet long enough for us to heat emboss. So I'll bring in my clear embossing powder, throw that right over top, and then I'm gonna heat set this until it's clear and shiny. All right, so then I'll just go in using my ink pads, and onto my craft sheet, I'm going to add all of the different colors that I want to use of my ink pads. So just take the ink pad and kind of smoosh it down onto the surface, and this will apply enough ink down to watercolor. All right, then I'm just gonna go in with a paintbrush, and I like to start out first by just adding down a layer of water. This is gonna kind of prep the cardstock in order to take any of the color, and it'll also help blend the color together. Because if you leave the cardstock dry and you add the color down, the color kind of sinks right in, and it's not gonna give you a chance to blend it. Here, I'm gonna go in with a little bit of Clear Skies. I've added some water down into this, so it's really easy to apply to the whole surface of the jeans. And you'll notice the color was pretty easy to blend out. Because we used water at first, it didn't just sink right into the cardstock. Now I'm gonna use less water and go in with the exact same color, Clear Skies, and this is going to add some shading because the color is a little bit darker and less watered down. Now I like to bring in even a little bit more depth. So next I'm gonna use some No Diving, and this is going to really add lots more color. So a darker color is going to bring in a lot of depth rather than just using the same color. For the Scarecrow's face, I'm gonna use a little bit of Over the Moon. I love this kind of light yellow color. And then I'll go in with a little bit of a darker yellow called Slippery and Wet. And then again, add that to kind of shade it in. So I'm adding it right underneath his hat where there would be a little bit of a shadow. For his hat, I'm gonna use a little bit of cookie dough, and then I'll add a little bit of shading using some Gur. And if you've got too much, go in and wipe some of it off the brush and then blend that color out. And watercolor and inks are really forgiving. So if you've got too much, add more water. If you need more color, then use a little bit less water, and it's super easy to do. And then I'll tape it down using a little bit of mint tape to hold it in place and make sure that it doesn't shift. I'll run that through my die cutting machine and then pop it right out. And there we have our image. Now I'm gonna place the Scarecrow, I think more to this left side so that there's some room over here for a sentiment. And I like to go in with the clear acetate sheet of the stamp set and just kind of test out different sentiments and see what's gonna work best. I think that Happy Fall fits there really nicely. I'm going to stamp it in this open space right next to where the Scarecrow is gonna go. Then I'll pop this guy up on some foam tape right next to it for a little bit of dimension. But you know what? I think some of these smaller sentiments are really great for the inside of your card. So I'm gonna use the Sending You Warm Hugs and Sweet Kisses. Stamp that right into the center there. And this is a fun little sentiment on the inside, and then of course you can write your own handwritten note underneath it, but I think adding a sentiment on the inside is really fun. So there we have our finished card. I love how this background turned out using the Nothing But Net stencil to get all of that amazing texture and those fall colors. I hope you guys really enjoyed today's video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up and leave a comment down below on which card was your favorite. Also down there is a full supplies list to everything that I used, and using those links helps support me, so I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for stopping by, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye!